All right, so today we're going to talk about internal boundaries, and this should really say internal and international boundaries. But those are political boundaries. Remember, the political is something that's established by some kind of sovereign nation or government, and the divisions of that government, okay, between states, right, or inside of states, okay, and it reflects the balance of power that have been negotiated or imposed through war, or however they were worked out. So we're going to be able to explain the nature and function of international and internal boundaries. And then we'll talk about voting districts, redistricting, and a term that you're familiar with because you played the game called gerrymandering. We'll explain that and then play the game again, and you'll see how that works. Okay. All right. So international boundaries, in theory, they exist, so we know exactly where a country's territory begins and where it ends. But it doesn't always work that way, so it's not always perfect. And what we found with technology is that even inside the United States, what we thought were the boundaries of states were off. Not by a lot, it doesn't matter, but they weren't perfect. Okay, so types of boundaries. There's a defined boundary that's established by a legal document. Okay, so the boundary between the United States and Canada is that straight line that runs right above Montana and North Dakota. Okay, that's a defined boundary. And there's a legal document, an agreement. Okay, it was called I can't remember the name, but it was between Canada and the United States. I know the Adams-Onis Treaty is what worked out the line between the state of Washington and British Columbia in Canada. Okay, and that continues that straight line, right? So that's a defined boundary. A delimited boundary is drawn on a map to show the limits of that space. So delimited shows where a country's jurisdiction ends. Like, we're not responsible for what happens in Canada if it happens in Canada, right? We're not responsible for what happens across the border in Mexico because it's not inside the United States jurisdiction. So delimited basically means it shows the limits of where a country's jurisdiction would be. Okay, and then demarcated boundary is one that's identified by a physical object that's placed on the landscape. Okay, it could be a sign, it could be a wall, like the wall that's partially built between the United States and Mexico. There's all kinds of walls, even inside of, not just around the world, okay, like the Berlin Wall that used to be there. That would definitely be a demarcated one. But there's also lines inside of cities, okay, where there's gates that are built or walls that are built to separate different parts of the cities, okay, which that's crazy, but that happens inside the United States. Okay, so these are examples of demarcated, right? Welcome to Belleville, right? So this is where you go from Swansea into Belleville, okay, right by our school's district office, right? Also in St. Louis County, you guys have seen these signs, whether it's St. Louis County or any other jurisdiction all over the place. That's a demarcated boundary, okay? Okay, political boundaries can be natural or geometric. This is really easy. Natural just means they're physical features, okay? Like in between Missouri and Illinois is the Mississippi River. Okay, in between Indiana and Illinois is the Wabash River in the southern part of the states. Okay, in Kentucky, we're separated from them by the Ohio River. Okay, so those are physical boundaries that separate people. Geometric boundary is a straight line boundary. So if you look at the boundary between Libya and Egypt on that map, okay, most of that is a straight line boundary. That's geometric, like math. It's a straight line. Okay, it doesn't follow a geographic feature. So in between Illinois and Wisconsin, if you look at that map of Illinois, on the left, up there in the northern part, there's a straight line that goes across. That's a boundary between Illinois and Wisconsin. That is a geometric one, right? Okay, so again, how are all those formed? There's a political thing that had happened at some point. The government of what was at the time Wisconsin and at the time Illinois, they had to come up with some kind of agreement to make that the border, even inside the United States. The same thing happens in countries. Okay, a small country on that map. Okay, I'll take the example of, well, Sudan is south of Egypt there. Okay, they just created a new country called South Sudan, right? If you remember devolution, that country was created. Well, they have to agree, okay, to where that political border is going to be. Okay, so, all right, so boundary disputes, if countries don't agree or territories don't agree, or property owners, depends on the scale. It could be really local. Okay, it could be a national scale or it could be on a global scale between numerous countries. So in a definitional boundary dispute, two or more parties disagree about the definition, where the boundary is defined. okay, based on legal documents. And that's really the only thing that matters here, is that they're based on legal documents. So this usually occurs with an antecedent boundary, okay, which, remember, antecedent boundary is you can see the effects of something that was there before. Okay, so it changes while the boundary's there, and then they have to fix it later. So Chile and Argentina in South America, the southern border was in dispute because nobody really settled it. So they thought this was their land, and somebody else thought that was their land. Okay, that's a definitional boundary. Okay, where they have to create some kind of legal document to make it. Okay, locational boundary disputes is where the boundary should be. So the U.S.-Mexican War, there was the Mexicans thought that the boundary was a river called the Nueces River, and the Americans, so the Nueces River is like right here, and the Americans thought that the boundary was right here, the Rio Grande. Okay, and so they when Mexico crossed over the Rio Grande, Americans thought they were on our territory, but when Americans crossed over the Nueces, the Mexicans thought we were on their territory. Okay, so it erupted into a war that America won. Okay, and then that boundary was reestablished and it became defined. Okay, it became a definitional boundary. There was a legal document then that established it. That's exactly what it was. Irredentism can play in here too. When, remember, that's when a country says, "Oh well, there's a lot of people that speak our same language right across the border, so we're going to change the boundary." Right? We don't agree where this location of the boundary is. Okay, so another type. There's four main types of boundary disputes. An operational boundary dispute is kind of about the rules. Okay, so where does the responsibility become ours? Like the best example for me to understand this is after 9/11, the United States and Canada had to work out an operational boundary agreement, not to establish the line of where it is, but to have rules that would keep people from coming in from, say, a terrorist would go to Canada and then go from Canada into the United States, because you could have done that. That's exactly what the hijackers did. Okay, they could have done that. Well, we established new rules, operational things, to make sure that that didn't happen. Okay, so some European countries didn't. A couple of years ago, they wouldn't let Syrian refugees into the country. Okay, that's an operational thing. That's the rules that that country chooses to live by, and it can cause a dispute. Okay, it's a boundary dispute. And then allocational boundary disputes separate natural resources, right? So the best way to look at this, right? Allocational, if you really remember allocation of resources, that's the key. So here's a great example. In 1991, when I was like your guys' age, there was a war that was fought between Iraq and Kuwait. Iraq invaded Kuwait because Iraq said, and they weren't right, but Iraq said that Kuwait, they literally were digging underground from the Kuwaiti territory there into the Ramallah oil fields. Okay, well, Kuwait didn't do that. Iraq was looking for an excuse to go to war. Okay, so this war was fought over resources. The boundary dispute there, because it was located on the boundary, that creates an allocational dispute because of the allocation of resources. Okay, all right. So boundaries influenced interaction after World War II got over with. The Europeans did not want to fight anymore. They had been through World War I and World War II, and so they worked together. They established the European Union, which is a supranational organization, which we'll talk about later in the unit. And they also established the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the Warsaw Pact. Okay, so NATO was the democratic countries, and the Warsaw Pact was the communist countries. And they feuded against each other, right? They didn't agree with each other at all, but the boundaries that were established there created those organizations, or those organizations were created because of the boundaries. So the boundaries can lead to change. Okay, shatter belts is an activity you guys have done. I believe that by the time you see this, it'll be last week. The supranational organizations, again, will work together. Okay, and the borders become invisible. In Europe, it doesn't really matter. You could go from France to Switzerland without much problem. Okay, there's not a lot of operational things that happen at the border anymore. Okay, that time after World War II, and it continues to be this way, was the most peaceful time in European history. In Korea, which you guys saw the example in the shatter belt activity, Korea is the total opposite, right? They have a militarized boundary, okay, where they literally have troops on both sides to keep people from crossing over. Okay, it has not been peaceful there at all. Okay, so voting districts, this talks about inside. So this is internal instead of kind of international. The electorate is the people that vote. So in our last election, more people in our electorate voted than at any other election in the history of the United States. Okay, so the electorate are the actual people that do the voting. The census determines where those people are located. So they determine the districts that those people come from. Those districts are equal in population as much as possible so that they can represent people fairly, kind of. And you guys did the gerrymandering thing last week, and we'll look at that a little bit more in just a second. Okay, so after they do the census, there's a reapportionment, right? So they have to change it. Like Illinois, our electoral people, our number of votes in the electoral college is going down. It used to be, I think it was 25 when I was your age, and now it's 20, and I believe it's going to 18. Okay, because population from Illinois is moving somewhere else. Like if you remember during the migration unit when we talked about people moving to the Sun Belt. Okay, people used to live in the Rust Belt up in Ohio and Pennsylvania. Well, a lot of that population has moved to the Sun Belt, to Arizona. So now, what used to be the popular votes, or the electoral votes in Pennsylvania and Ohio, those numbers have shifted and they've moved to places like Nevada and Arizona. Okay, so the districts have to be reapportioned after people move. So every 10 years we do a census, okay, and then we change that. So redistricting is the same thing, right? We literally redraw the districts. So reapportionment means you got to change the number, but redistricting means they literally physically, they change the physical lines of where the districts are. So when Illinois loses a congressional district, you go down people, but you got to redo the map. You got to redistrict the map to show 18 instead of 20 districts. Okay, so reapportionment is when you do it based on the people. Redistricting is when you literally create new districts from those people, so they know who to vote for. Because each district is going to have a representative, and they got to know who the representative is that they're choosing from. Okay, so gerrymandering. You guys looked at that little activity last week. A little history. Okay, is between this guy. This is where it came from. Okay, he is the governor of Massachusetts. His name was Elbridge Gerry. Okay, and he created a district inside of Massachusetts that looked like a salamander, right? It looked like a lizard. Okay, the way that he created this district, and he did that because whatever party he was, I don't even know what party. Say he was a Republican. So whatever party he was in, a Republican party, he made the district really wide so that he could include more Republicans to vote out the Democrats in a certain part. So as long as you have like 51% Republicans and 49% Democrats, then those Democrats are going to lose the election. Okay, so his opponents didn't like this, and they called it gerrymandering. However, people around the country decided, that's a pretty good idea. And both the Democrats and the Republicans have done this, okay, with gerrymandering. And like I said, we'll play the game again so you guys can get a look at it, right? So here are the Illinois congressional districts. Okay, so I'm not even sure how many that's got on there, but this will change after the census this past year. So those districts will have to change. And you can see that most of the districts are in Chicago. So what that's showing you is these districts are based on population because there's way more people. Okay, but if you look at like 17, okay, well, that's a crazy looking district size. Okay, and some of them up in Chicago are even crazier. So you look at like this is what the internal ones look like in Chicago. You can see salamanders in there, how they've done that. But they do this strategically because they know that a certain amount of Democrats live in one place and a certain amount of Republicans live in the other. So by doing it this way, you can say, yeah, this is probably going to be a Republican district and they're going to vote for the Republicans. And this is probably going to be a Democratic district and they're going to vote for the Democrats. The key to understanding this is the party in charge gets to pick this. So the party in charge then can make it and arrange it so that their party wins. And again, I'm not blaming Democrats or Republicans. They both do it in different places in the country. Okay, and it's crazy. Now, there are some states that have developed rules, and I think it's a fantastic idea, that there's a bipartisan group that chooses, okay, where these districts are going to be. So the Republicans don't get to pick, the Democrats don't get to pick. They put a panel of, say, 12 people together, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats. They come up with this in the most fair way possible. Okay, that makes things more fair. Elections, and I don't mean to be political, when this is going on, elections aren't fair. It is not representing the true belief of the people in that district because they changed the size of the district when they redistricted to make it so that their party can win. That doesn't represent what the will of the people. It should be done solely based on population to make it more fair. Okay, so these are more pictures of districts. Okay, this is Illinois legislative districts. Um, and the red is the Senate districts, and then the other ones are the House districts. So you can see again, Chicago, the blue is the House district. Chicago dominates because of the population. Okay, so this is the game you played. Okay, and we'll do a little bit more about that. Okay, so you make sure you know what gerrymandering is, and then I won't make you write this, but it's important that you understand the districts and how gerrymandering can really influence an election. Okay, we will stop right there today, and I will see you tomorrow.